Hello, everyone. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info. A little bit of something different on this video. With this Saturday's Cup Series race in Richmond being on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, I debated about talking about the subject in the live stream after the race or just making it its own video. I think that, generally it'd probably be better just kind of be a standalone thing if I was going to talk about it at all. With the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, I do feel that everybody's, sharing their memories and where they were at that time. Nowadays, it seems like, we're kind of going through every kind of historical event of one kind or another, and all the craziness that's just happened in the last year and a half alone. But for one thing that's really eye-opening, of course, is that it's now been 20 years since the September 11th attacks, and a lot of you guys that follow this channel or just on YouTube in general, you weren't even alive at the time, or maybe you were very young and don't remember it. And I think in that context, it's important to kind of share stories about where you were and what you remember from that time. Now, let me preface this on this story here. Of course, I wasn't in New York at the time, or Northern Virginia or Pennsylvania or any of those areas directly involved in it, and I didn't really know anybody directly, that was a relation or anybody that was involved in it. But clearly, this was an event that affected everybody. It didn't matter whether you were, on California or Alaska or anywhere else. And it really is a moment that, you kind of think back to here and there. So I wanted to kind of share that in this video here. And I want to make it kind of a separate standalone thing. So if you're not interested in that, you don't have to watch this, and there's all that. But if you are interested, I wanted to kind of offer this here as well. So at the time of, in the summer of 2001, I was 18 going on 19. I believe. I think that would be right. So 82. I think I turned 18 when the USS Cole was bombed, and that was in 2000. And then in 2001, I just graduated from high school in Antioch, California. I was about to start college. First semester at the University of California at Irvine was going to start September 16th. And these are the last few days before that. And I was going to start training on the rowing team and everything like that. And that was kind of going on in the background. One thing that stands out in my memory, especially of that summer, was just how little seemed to be in the news. Like, it seemed like it was a very kind of calm, kind of uneventful summer, at least from what you would see. Now, this is, of course, at a time where, social media didn't exist, and, the internet hadn't really taken off. I mean, you had, websites you could check out for like CNN and everything else at the time. But it seemed like a time where there really wasn't much happening. The biggest story, I think, from that summer was the disappearance and then tragically, ultimately the murder of Chandra Levy, and the stories that surrounded Senator, I believe it was Senator Gary Condit, being one of the lead suspects of that. And that pretty much was the story of that entire summer. I remember one time there was a news report, and this was like July or August, where a breaking news segment came in on like MSNBC or one of these networks. And it was just a story of a plane that was trying to land, and a landing gear tire was flat, or the front nose gear hadn't come down all the way. And they would literally stop the broadcast to show this plane coming in. And it landed, and the front landing gear kind of locked up, at ground for a bit, and there were sparks coming up, and the plane, thankfully landed safely. But I think, that really captured in hindsight, certainly in what happened in September, just how different that time was. I mean, nowadays, everything is a breaking news story. Everything is a big thing that just, it's like, oh, this is happening, this is happening. It seems like it's a relentless pace. But back then it was very different, and at least it felt that way. Now, and this is cable news. This is what everybody had access to. It wasn't just us in California. So that was really unusual. I do remember also, of course, this was the time that reality TV was a big thing. I know reality TV is pretty much everywhere, to the point that it's, you know, part of YouTube and everything. One show that I particularly enjoyed, I mean, I was hooked into it like everybody else. I watched the first season of Survivor in 2000, and everybody wanted to know what was happening. And 2001 was kind of the time when all the other networks were jumping on board. Fox had a show called Murder in Small Town X, which was a really entertaining show. Because it had this whole thing where they set up like this murder mystery, and they had these different people involved. They had these people called the sweepers who would stand there like, you know, it'd be like this abandoned like fishing town or something like that, and you had these guys who just stand there sweeping in the background. And of course, you know, reality TV, it's all staged stuff like that. And they had like these challenges and everything. And one of the competitors in it, in fact, I believe the person who won it was a firefighter from New York. His name was Angel. And he was the winner. And at the last show, which aired, I think it was late August, early September, thereabouts, he said, like, you know, oh, this is fun, kind of getting to play detective, but I like being a firefighter, and so I want to stick with that. I think the clip's here on YouTube, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Tragically, on September 11th, he was evacuating the Hilton, the hotel that was immediately in the footprint of the Trade Center towers, when the buildings collapsed, and he didn't make it out. And that was just one of the many, many stories, of course, that met their end that day. September 11th itself, this was just a couple days after the fall Richmond race. I mentioned last week, my brother and I always did fantasy picks along the way to talk about the different competitions, trying to pick winners. My brother picked the first winner in Darlington. I picked the winner at Richmond, and I had set up a videotape the night before. We had a TV downstairs, set up a videotape on that, and was taping the race because they were rebroadcasting it. I think it was on TNT or whatever the network was, because I think it was still at the NBC doing the second half of the schedule there, and setting that tape up. I mentioned at the same time, again, so that night I set up a tape for that. Before I changed the channel, there was like a comedy sketch that was on. I think Comedy Central was set on the cable box at the time. And there was this comedian that was making some joke about, like, you know, a pilot being suicidal or something like that. Didn't think much of it, but, you know, I mean, it was, you know, but obviously, doubt that ever aired again after what happened the next day. You know, and I remember finishing a book on the Titanic. I remember reading that. I mean, just so many things stand out from that. I was reading this book on the Titanic a friend got me, and I just finished it that night, and went to bed. And again, it was a few days before college. Our plan was like, I was going to get, my mom was saying, like, okay, well, let's go out and get some workout clothes so you can get ready for that. And we were going to do that the next day. And so, you know, just any day like any ordinary one. You go to bed, you wake up in the morning, and I distinctly remember, first thing I remember, I was getting up. It was, you know, about, gosh, like 8 or 9. I mean, it was Pacific time. So, I mean, well after everything had taken place over in New York. And I remember hearing a commotion downstairs, something about planes and something about towers. And I was just like, what the heck what are they talking about down there? Like, they're, you know, my parents are just reacting to something. And what I could piece together, it sounded like it was like something that happened in an airport. Because I guess I was thinking maybe about that report earlier in the year about, you know, a plane landing and having difficulties there, and just thinking about that. So I was expecting, like, oh gosh, like, you know, some accident happened in an airport. Was it one over here? Was it, you know, somewhere else? I don't know. So that's what I had in my mind. Obviously never expecting what ultimately you see. And of course, I think the first time I saw it, they showed the footage of the North Tower coming down, and it was just like, oh my God. And clearly, it was a point where it, you know, it in hindsight, it feels like the TV has been just on the news for, like, you know, every year ever since like that moment going forward. We had the 2000 election was a big story, of course, to say the least. That seemed to be another thing that dominated a month and a half during the Bush v. Gore decision and stuff. But really from that point, I mean, it just seemed like just the TV's blaring. We got 2 TVs in the house. They both had them on. I remember during all this, I mean, my brother, Laspro, on that, he was in high school. He was a high school freshman at the time. And when he got into class, they had TVs, of course, in all the rooms. And basically from one class to the next, they just had the news on, and it was just that all day. And you know, they were just watching that, and, you know, they were telling us to pick up students. Everybody wanted to be picked up from school that day because nobody knew what was happening, of course, and nobody knew if this was going to be something that was going to keep on going or anything. And even over here in the West Coast, where we were well away from where all these attacks had occurred, a lot of those flights were heading to San Francisco. So, we didn't know, you just didn't know what was going on. So really, I mean, again, even if for high school students, it's very rare. I mean, you're a high school student, you usually drive home from school, but, we picked him up just like, everybody else. But in between all that, I remember being at home and, even during like all the stuff in the news, and I think just to get out of the house, you're like, well, we were going to go get workout clothes. Let's go ahead and get workout clothes. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll go ahead and get in the car and do that. So my mom and I went out to a mall, downtown, and just the eeriest thing they had. There was a mall that we had that had like a Mervyn's, another one's pretty traditional one, not a big one, but kind of a smaller mall. The Mervyn's was open, and we were like the only ones in there. Like there were maybe like one cashier in there, and like, no TVs in there. You had no indication of what was going on, but the mall itself was closed off. They had closed off the entire mall. It was also closed off like it was after hours. And I didn't know how many people were in the parking lot. I don't really remember, but I remember going in there and it just being dead silent. And, we went in there and we, bought workout clothes and then headed back out, driving back on the road and seeing somebody put an American flag already on one of the fences above the freeway overpasses there. And yeah, just being fixed to the TV. And that was the thing. And certainly, an eerie and awful experience, to say the least. Another thing that really stands out, that night when they grounded all the planes, that was a big thing because we always had a lot of air traffic coming over us. Because again, we were kind of in the immediate, not right in the main Bay Area. We were kind of a little bit east of there, but we would have a lot of air traffic, and you would see a lot of flights coming back and forth, and see the lights blinking up there. And then when they grounded all the flights that afternoon, it's just nothing. We'd stand out in the yard. You'd see up, you just see stars, and it was just quiet. And that was I mean, gosh, it was so weird. I mean, it's just completely eerie. Like I said, I had nobody that was directly involved in or was in the Trade Center or anything. But one friend of mine, actually, I used to, before YouTube, of course, was taking off, I found this guy over in New York who sold videotapes. He sold videotape copies of NASCAR races, and that was actually the first guy that scored me a copy of JD McDuffie's final race at Watkins Glen. He sent a video to me there. He had a whole list that he ordered. A friend of a friend or somebody like that, I reached out to him, and I remember that he was from New York, so I was like, oh my God. So like I sent a message to him to see if he was okay. He told me he lived in a different area of it, but he had a friend of his who knew somebody, in the Cantor Fitzgerald firm. And of course, that was the one where I think it was the boss just went to the lobby of the Trade Center to check somebody in, and right before the first plane hit, and everybody else, they just didn't make it out. And that was about the closest connection I had, but it was just like, he told me about that. I'm like, oh my God. So, and, certainly I think the scale of it was something that, it was hard to digest, really. I mean, we had other, obviously there was a 1993 terrorist attack at the Trade Center that happened. That seemed almost like ancient history. Like HBO had a documentary on it called Path to Paradise, that, had already come and gone by that point. And, it was kind of treated like, oh, well, this had happened, but we found the guys who did it, and, it's open and shut, and the building survived and all that. And I think another thing that we had other terrorist attacks at the time. Of course, Oklahoma City was a really big thing. What happened in 1995 at the Oklahoma City building there, the Murrah building. My dad actually just recently went to the memorial there, and saw that. That was one of the biggest attacks. And that, I mean, what was it, like 130, 140 people were killed in that? That was a really big story, and I think that stood out more in the public memory, in terms of like, the scale of something versus, what happened in 1993, the Trade Center. And And then, that was certainly a big story. I mean, there were attacks on embassies, of course. That turned out to be much more significant than I think a lot was talked about in the late 90s. But somehow, again, I think with that story, it didn't get a lot of traction because it just felt so remote. It wasn't anything domestically. It wasn't anything here. But yeah, that was really a big part of it. But yeah, and then we were, I think we were going to fly down to Irvine to get set up in college. I don't know how that was going to work because there was other stuff we were moving and everything, but obviously we called in and we canceled our flight from that. I mean, nobody wanted to fly after this, certainly, just to say the least. And when we called, they didn't, they had no issue with it because, of course, we were one of many people that were calling to cancel flights, and nobody, certainly was comfortable with it. Actually, one other flight I had, I think probably one of the first flights I did after that, from Orange County back up to the Bay Area, was after the other plane crash happened in Queens that November, where the tail of the plane came off and it landed in a neighborhood, and people were wondering if that was a terrorist attack. And that was kind of a big thing that happened from that time. I remember doing a flight back from there, and there were maybe like 6 other people on the plane. And this is like, flight from Oakland to LA. And you figured that would be a lot of traffic, a lot of people in there. Not on that day in particular. But that was, yeah, I mean, that was eerie. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's a moment, you hear maybe parents or grandparents talk about the Kennedy assassination. You hear, maybe it was a celebrity that died. You remember when John Lennon was shot. You remember when Dr. King was shot, something like that, something that just stands out so much in one's memory. And I think for people, my age or around that age, that was certainly something that stood out. And of course you think about, oh gosh, are we going to war? Is there going to be a draft? Is there all that? I had 2 good friends of mine on the rowing team that enlisted in the Marines immediately afterwards. Thankfully, they're okay. One of my cousins got into the Army, and another relative in the Navy. They got through okay. But there's so many others that obviously haven't. And I don't want to, it's all everything. Well, everything that's happened really, since then on that same note. But yeah, that was, I'm trying to think anything else within that context. Like, yeah, I remember we ordered lunch. We went through a drive-through at KFC and brought food back, and we were just watching the TV on like all day, just watching the stuff, and people trying to make sense of this, and people coming up on the news and showing pictures of their relatives, trying to find them. And again, in a pre-internet time, I think of it so different of versus the Boston Marathon bombing that happened years later. And, there was much more, the social media existed and trying to get information before that. I mean, in 2001, it was just trying it was so hard for people to get any information on anybody that was in the buildings, if anybody was there or not. Cell phones were kind of in their infancy too. So communication was difficult. Again, I didn't really have any, connections out there in New York or on the East Coast, but, it's, you could see just from the infrastructure that was around at that time, how logistically challenging, certainly that was at the same time. So, that was a big part of it. And gosh, I remember, I bought some magazines about it. Well, news magazines, that's their way you get news more than, the internet. I remember picking up some news magazines at a newsstand in Irvine, and the owner of the shop just crying. He was 50, 60-year-old guy. He probably, he probably remember the Kennedy assassination or anything else. And he just just didn't even like seeing the pictures. And that's what it is for a lot of people. So, I hope that a lot of people are sharing their stories and what they remember, from that, and really trying to put themselves in that time. And I hope that, I hope that this, for those of you that maybe, again, were too young to remember what happened back then, or, you weren't born yet, I hope that maybe this, it's another piece of the puzzle to kind of remember what that was like, and of course, not forgetting the sacrifices that were made by so many firefighters, police department, Port Authority, and just average everyday people that were just, it was just one ordinary day, and then suddenly it just wasn't. So I'm glad a lot of people are talking about 9/11 and putting it out there, and making sure that they're not forgetting, because it seemed at the moment that there's no way anybody's going to forget about this. It's the scale of it was so hard. It's so hard to get your hands around. I mean, I imagine it was probably the same way people felt about the Titanic back in the early 1900s. It was just just unthinkable, the scale of it. But I think I think the more people, share their stories and talk about it and remember, I think that's still a positive thing. I think that's important. And then of course, hope that, we never face something like that again. So that's about it for the video on this. I just wanted to share that there. Hope you, if you were ever curious about it, I hope that that was interesting, and certainly, absolutely condolences to the family and everybody, families and friends and heroes and everybody that we lost back then. And they are absolutely not forgotten. So thank you again for watching.